Have you ever held a $100 bill and thought, what is this actually worth? It's just a piece of paper, right? But we all agree it has value. Well, what if I told you there was a specific day, a single moment in history, when the nature of that value changed forever? A day when money, as our grandparents knew it, stopped being real in the same way. It sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie, but it's a true story. And understanding this moment will change how you see every dollar, euro, or yen you ever earn or spend. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's a fascinating piece of economic history. Let's rewind the clock. For most of human history, money was real because it was directly tied to something tangible and scarce, usually a precious metal like gold or silver. You could, in theory, walk into a bank with your paper money and demand the equivalent amount in gold. This was known as the gold standard. It acted like an anchor, limiting how much money a government could print. You couldn't just fire up the printing presses without having the gold to back it up. This system provided a sense of stability and discipline. The value of your money was literally as good as gold. So what happened? The story of our modern money begins in the aftermath of World War II. The world's economies were in shambles, and they needed a stable system to rebuild. In 1944, delegates from 44 Allied nations gathered in a small town in New Hampshire called Bretton Woods. What they came up with was a new global financial order. The Bretton Woods Agreement established the US dollar as the world's primary reserve currency. Every other major currency was pegged to the dollar at a fixed exchange rate. But here's the crucial part. The US dollar itself was pegged to gold at a rate of $35 per ounce. This meant other countries could, in theory, exchange their US dollars for gold from the United States' massive reserves. For a while, the system worked. It fostered decades of global economic growth and stability, an era often called the Golden Age of capitalism. The dollar was king and its crown was made of solid gold. But by the 1960s, the cracks began to show. The United States was spending vast sums of money. The Vietnam War was incredibly expensive, and so were the ambitious Great Society social programs at home. The US was printing more and more dollars to pay for everything, but its gold reserves weren't growing at the same pace. Other countries, particularly in Europe, started to get nervous. They looked at the mountain of dollars they were holding and then at the shrinking pile of gold in Fort Knox and thought, wait a minute, does the US actually have enough gold to back all these dollars? It was like a global game of musical chairs. Everyone was dancing to the tune of the dollar, but they started to suspect there weren't enough golden chairs for everyone if the music suddenly stopped. Countries like France, led by the skeptical Charles de Gaulle, began demanding their gold. They started sending ships to the US to swap their dollars for physical gold bullion. The US gold reserves began to dwindle at an alarming rate. The system was under immense pressure. The anchor was slipping. The US was facing a choice. Either implement painful austerity measures to strengthen the dollar, which would be politically unpopular, or do something drastic. And that brings us to the exact moment, the day the money changed. It was a quiet Sunday evening. August 15th, 1971. President Richard Nixon went on national television to address the nation. Most people expected him to talk about a new economic plan to fight inflation, but then he dropped a bombshell. In what was supposed to be a temporary measure, Nixon announced that the United States would unilaterally and immediately suspend the convertibility of the US dollar into gold. This event is famously known as the Nixon shock. In that instant, the direct link between the US dollar and the physical commodity was severed. The Bretton Woods system, the foundation of the post-war global economy, was shattered. What did this mean in practice? It meant that from that day forward, the US dollar and by extension, most of the world's currencies was no longer backed by gold. It was now backed by, well, nothing tangible. It became what we call fiat currency. The word fiat comes from Latin and means let it be done by decree. Fiat money has value simply because the government says it does and because we, the people, have faith in that government and agree to accept it as a medium of exchange. The value of your money was no longer tied to a scarce physical resource, but to trust, confidence, and the decisions of central bankers and politicians. The anchor was gone and the ship of global finance was now floating free. So was this a good thing or a bad thing? The answer is incredibly complex and economists still debate it today. On one hand, breaking from gold gave governments much more flexibility. Central banks could now manage the money supply to combat recessions, stimulate growth, and respond to financial crises. If the economy was slowing down, they could inject more money into the system to get things moving again, an option they didn't really have under the strict gold standard. This flexibility is credited with helping to prevent depressions and soften economic downturns in the decades since. It allowed for a more dynamic and responsive economic policy. However, there's a significant downside. Without the discipline of the gold standard, there's no hard limit on how much money can be created. And when governments can print money freely to pay their bills, it can lead to inflation, which is the gradual erosion of the purchasing power of your money. That $100 bill buys less and less over time. It can also lead to massive government debt, asset bubbles, and a cycle of boom and bust. Since 1971, we've seen a dramatic increase in both government debt and the overall money supply around the world. The Nixon shock essentially opened the floodgates. Think about it this way. Before 1971, money was like a warehouse receipt for a specific amount of gold. After 1971, money became more like a share in a company called the U.S. economy. Its value depends on the performance and stability of that company. If the company is doing well, the shares are valuable. If it's managed poorly, their value can plummet. We all became shareholders in a system based on faith rather than physical assets. This fundamental shift has had profound effects on our everyday lives, even if we don't realize it. It's why the price of a house or a college education seems to have skyrocketed over the past 50 years. It's not just that things got more expensive. It's also that the value of the dollar itself has decreased. It encouraged spending and borrowing over saving because the money you save today will be worth less tomorrow. It has also fueled the rise of complex financial markets as people search for ways to protect and grow their wealth in an environment of constant inflation. So, the day money stopped being real wasn't a single cataclysmic event, but a quiet administrative decision made on a Sunday night. Yet it reshaped our world. It fundamentally changed the nature of value, wealth, and savings. It transformed our relationship with money from something grounded in the earth to something based on collective belief. The next time you look at a bill in your wallet, remember the story of August 15th, 1971. It's not just paper. It's a symbol of a massive economic experiment that we are all living through. And understanding that story is the first step to navigating the complex financial world we live in today. Thanks so much for watching. This stuff can be complex, but I think it's incredibly important to understand. If you found this interesting and want to learn more about how the world of money really works, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more videos. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time.